I have the immense pleasure and honor to invite you to a panel led by fantastic speakers discussing the much less talked about side of the world's linguistic landscape. Beyond the big FIGs, there are around 6,700 other languages on our planet. Unfortunately, the world's linguistic heritage is shrinking every day, and indigenous languages disappear at an alarming rate. With that in mind, our speakers partner with the United Nations Initiative in 2019, the International Year of Indigenous Languages, in order to raise awareness of their important contribution to the world's cultural heritage and diversity and the need for digital transformation. So they're going to share a few success stories and talk about some key initiatives of those languages less left behind. So now I would like to pass it over to Cornelia and the panel to introduce themselves.
All right. Hi, Sabina, and thank you for this grand introduction. We are very, very happy to be here today and talk about, like you said, the less prominent side of the linguistic landscape. And we're going to start off by introducing ourselves. We do have one announcement. Roy Boney from the Cherokee Nation cannot be with us today. You will have seen his name on the panelists, but he had a serious family emergency, and that comes first. But we will cover his content because we are lucky enough to have a bunch of people who have worked with him and Cherokee for a number of years. So that's the bad news, but here comes the good news. You're panelists. Excited to be here, excited that Gala could pull this off, that while we're all at home and working from home and working with home, you might hear my dog at some point, we are still here. We're still a community, right? And I guess that's one point we're also gonna try to get across today, that there is a larger language community beyond FIGSJ. And how about we do introductions and go around the room? Jeanette, do you want to start out?
Thanks, Cornelia and Sabina, for the wonderful introduction. I am so honored to be part of this panel with everyone here, people that I know and our friends. My name is Jeanette Stewart. I have been in the industry for a while. I started as a buyer of translation, and then because I couldn't find medical translators, I created an LSP, which I sold in 2008. And since then, I have been an advocate for our industry by creating Translation Commons. And this is an online volunteer community. And we deal with a lot of programs, one of which is the Language Digitization Initiative, which is very relevant to today's panel. And I'll be very happy to discuss some of our programs with you.
Glad to have you, Jeanette. You are certainly an expert in that area. Well, I don't want to discriminate here, so I was going to say all ladies first, but let's go to Craig Cornelius. And no, we are not related. I have the first name and he has the last name, but no relation. Take it away, Craig.
Thanks for the introduction, and I'm very happy to be here. It's exciting to talk to people about some of the work that many people are doing around the world in native languages. I am privileged to do some of this work through my position at Google. I have been in the international engineering team at Google for 13 years now. I have been working with not only the big languages and the Unicode standard and support for all of Google products, but I've also gotten involved with many indigenous communities around the world, beginning with my friends in the Cherokee Nation in 2008. It's been an amazing journey to learn about the needs and interests and excitement that people have about their languages, especially when the digital technologies start to work for them.
Mm-hmm. Glad to have you, Craig. You will bring so much to this. And Ludmila, from the trenches of the LSP world. Go ahead.
having me. My name is Ludmila Galavin, and I'm the CEO of Masterword Services. We are an LSP, but I started my career over 30 years ago as a language professional, both a translator and an interpreter. And today we support corporate world in about 60 to 80 languages, but we support a lot of government projects, healthcare projects, and other initiatives in over 400 languages. So we have been working with languages of limited diffusion for a long time, and we're also very actively involved with the Translation Commons.
Very good. Glad to have you, Mila. And I am Cornelia Sattel. I lead localization at Salesforce Commerce Cloud in the Boston area. Mostly I'm located on Cape Cod. And I have a background as a translator and linguist. So I come from the original, resource world that we're all leveraging. But as it occurred to me, really, as the United Nations was declaring the International Year of the Indigenous Languages in 2019, that I know very, very little about Indigenous languages, how they are being brought online. I learned 8 languages, but yeah, FIGSJ. None of the languages of limited diffusion, as they are called, or emerging languages. And there are so many languages. The counts vary. Some people say 6,700. Many of them disappearing at an alarming speed. And as I was digging further into this, I was talking to my friends here and noticed what a wealth of information is out there. So that's what we're hoping to bring to you today. And so just to reiterate, why is each of you here today, and why is each of you on the panel so adamant and so eager to not leave the Indigenous languages behind? What are your reasons for your passion? Jeanette, you want to go? You're on mute, most used sentence in the pandemic.
Thanks, Cornelia. So I want to say that language is knowledge. And it's a knowledge of the cultures and of all the different identities in the world, where different communities have different earth, planet, ecosystem knowledge. And I'll give you an example so you understand. In a remote place in Africa, a community calls their plants names according to what usage those plants have. Now that has nothing to do with our taxonomy, botanical taxonomy. So if they were to, translate these, we would then have a knowledge that we don't have today. So if that language of that community disappears, then the knowledge of how they use these plants will also disappear. And that's just a small example of how, the environment is led by these communities and languages.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, Roy was telling us the other day an example for this, like the greeting, how do you do, in Cherokee is something along the lines, translated literally, are you at peace? I found that very compelling. So language is culture, and with a language disappearing, we risk losing the culture, or a milestone in that culture.
And the knowledge.
Yeah, and the knowledge of the world around that community. Craig, what is your take here?
Well, coming from a technology background, one of my first interests is encouraging people to use their languages on the internet, be comfortable with sharing information with all the applications and tools that are out there. And working with folks like in the Cherokee Nation, people in Africa, people in Bangladesh, Australia, and many other parts of the world, I've come to realize that it's not just a matter of them being able to use the tools in the dominant languages that matter. They need to be able to use the languages that they speak with their aunts and uncles, grandparents, and their friends, that reflect their culture. Let them express their history. Let them use the language tools that they have now. It's not just a matter of being nice. It's a matter of helping them to be the people they are without being stuffed into the Western mindset and the Western point of view. I'm here because technology can help with this, and it's been very exciting to work with these groups. It is so fun when people realize that there's a keyboard on their mobile devices that they can use to start texting. I was invited to Africa to a conference where there were 800 people in the room excited about using their writing system, the equivalent of the ABCs, because they could start educating their children in their own language. So that satisfaction is tremendous. And of course, building a group of people who are comfortable using the internet in their own language also means that they may become customers of ours and will be pleased with the work that we've done and feel good about Google and the other companies that support them.
Yeah, so that's one big thing I've learned already in all the conversations I've had with you specifically, how technology can enable the survival of these indigenous languages, how it is not out to get them, it is out to make them survive these days. So we're going to hear a lot more about this. But Mila, let me ask you, why, as an LSP, why do you care about emerging languages where French, Italian, German, Spanish, Japanese probably, fills the to-do list?
Absolutely, and you're right, it does. But what's interesting is that the world is coming online, progressively more and more online. And the Broadband Commission set a goal for, it's a UNESCO international goal to bring 75% of the world online by year 2025. Which means that there's the next billion users coming online. But then the question is, in what language? And today, 40% of the world population doesn't have access to basic education in their language, much less than are they able to log online and Google and have access to Wikipedia or any information that we have. And numbers show that kids, when education is not provided in their language, have much less probability of graduating, even getting language education, because they not only receive new information, they also have comprehension, retention problems. So today, the true economic divide, the true discrimination is driven by access to education, and access to education is through language. Mm-hmm. That's where my personal passion comes in and drive.
Mm-hmm. And as a mid-sized LSP, how many emerging languages do you offer actually at this moment? And in which areas is the work? Is it interpreting? Is it translation, legal documents, healthcare? What types of work do you do there?
We have seen the number of languages explode through the years, and it's very interesting to observe. Your typical commercial world is no more than, it's grown from 20 to 40 to 60 to maybe 80 languages. But in the world of, again, legal, access to law, access to healthcare, access to education, we have been working in 400 languages, seeing a complete explosion over the last 10 years. Whether they're helping kids on the border who are being detained and who are, or people at the border and kids in court that are representing themselves. A lot of languages from Mayan communities, other indigenous communities. And then you have the economic trend of everybody now, travel is easier, everything is online, right? So there is more and more a need of serving those communities as well. So from the commercial point of view, how do you give the next billion users the same customer experience when they're accessing a bank service, or can they even access a bank service? Mm-hmm. So there's both sides that we see, and really, again, in the government world, healthcare, education, legal, there's a lot more languages being represented today.
How do you find the linguists, and how do they get trained?
Oh my God, that's a never-ending problem, because once you find, once you find a person who's truly bilingual in both languages, then that person has no education as a translator or as a professional linguist. So we actually had through the years to develop training, and we have developed 35 training courses that we offer to those community representatives, really, for those languages of limited diffusion. For both note-taking and how do you interpret in the legal setting versus business setting, and how do you translate. So we had to, out of necessity, come up with those educational materials, and almost running, well, actually are running like a whole program ongoing. And also that it's very interesting that there is a lot of people who are passionate about their language and who want to bring their language and information to their community. Mm-hmm. We're involved in a very interesting predicament. When the Soviet Union collapsed, a lot of the so-called republics fell off, and we were at that time working in Azerbaijan, providing language services. And they realized that they wanted to speak their language. So the country was in a dilemma what alphabet they take. They actually went away from Cyrillic alphabet to a Latin-based alphabet. Mm-hmm. And then they wanted to have everything in their language. And they had a 70-year gap in the terminology for oil and gas.
Because the language was so suppressed for so long, so technical terms wouldn't be there. Yeah.
Coming forward on wanting to develop that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Question to Craig. Azerbaijani, for example, had already an alphabet, had terms, but had a gap in its application. Probably just reduced to family conversations, informal conversations. Informal settings, but where do you even start if a language has no alphabet, has a few speakers left to interact with the modern world, and now you want to bring this language online and make sure it doesn't get left behind? Where do you start?
Well, first of all, technology is not going to solve all the problems, but languages are complex and reflect not only people's language or the way they communicate, but it's their identity, it's their culture. It is a deep part of them. Technology is of course in place for most languages now that have written forms. The Unicode standard covers almost all the world's written languages now. And in fact, tomorrow I'm going to be spending about 6 hours on a conference call about submissions to the Unicode standard for additional writing systems to be added and enhancements to be made. So it's a continuing process. If a language is written, probably the Unicode standard does already or will soon enable people to read and write in that language. And that involves, of course, lots of pieces, but once something is standardized, then people will develop fonts for it. Then companies and individuals will be encouraged to develop keyboards for it. But that progression isn't automatic. It requires people in the communities that are passionate about their language, and it requires technologists to even know that there is a need for such things. And I've been very lucky to have been approached by my friends in the Cherokee Nation.
Yeah, Cherokee is a poster child here. It's that's really a total success, right? I can use well, I can't, unfortunately, because I've stuck with FIGSJ, but I could learn Cherokee, and I could operate Windows in Cherokee. I could use Google in Cherokee. There are several fonts. There is I could text in Cherokee, right? So there you have it. But that started, I guess, with the syllabary that was developed by Sequoia in 1874. So they had a long-standing alphabet, right? So the language was documented.
Even earlier, I can't fill in completely for our partner Roy, but the Cherokee history is actually quite instructive. They didn't have a written language before the early 1800s, but a man named Sequoia, and yes, the trees are named after him, invented this writing system for the language. He spent years developing it, but once it was introduced to the Cherokee Nation in the mid 1820s, they adopted it very quickly, and soon the Cherokee Nation was more literate than the white settlers around them. And they quickly ordered and used a printing press. They printed their constitution, their laws. They developed their government based upon the written language that was based on the syllabary. It had 85 characters at that point and still does. And it was very phonetic and easy for them to learn and use. They've had lots of challenges, of course, from the Trail of Tears and many other things in their history. But the Cherokee folks have always been progressive adopters of technology. After they were moved to Oklahoma, they set up their printing press again. They set up schools. They developed books and again, their laws and literature and governing structures based upon the written word as well as the spoken word. And in spite of all the efforts of people to snuff out their language and culture, they have been persistent. The Cherokee were the first ones west of the Mississippi to have a telephone, which shows that they are very excited about their language. They worked with the Unicode standard just a few years after the Unicode process was developed, and got their writing system into it very quickly and easily. Well, I shouldn't say easily, very, very soon they worked at it and continue to work at it. And they contacted me and a bunch of other companies to continue the work that has been started by the pioneers in the Cherokee digital world. And Roy, our missing colleague, is actually the head of the language technology department at the Cherokee Nation. And not only does he have translators, but he also has strong support from the Cherokee Nation government for that continued work, outreach, schools, immersion schools for young kids, as well as continuing programs for high school and university. So they have a system and a history of strong support for their language. There may be only a few thousand speakers of this language, but they are determined that it's not going to die out with the elders. They are determined that the young people will continue their language.
That would have been a good alternative title to our panel here. Size doesn't matter, right? Before Jeanette tells us a little bit about the tools and the digitization initiative from Translation Commons and just what work her organization is doing in the, by now it's, I guess, the International Decade of Indigenous Languages that has been declared. I have one more follow-up question for you, Craig. So it sounds to me when I read things like that Android supports 950 keyboards, that as soon as my language would have a writing system, and I could get Unicode pages for that, then I would reach out to companies like Google to see if they can help bring me online, right? Are these the steps? First, you must have a writing system in place. You must map your sounds to an alphabet.
Having a writing system is critical for many of the aspects of being online for any of us. But it's important to note also that even languages that don't have written form or aren't used a lot by in written form can still use audio and video tools that are available out there. And you can think of lots of different ways that this can be done. People are recording language lessons and sharing them widely around the world. So there is support. One of the key things about such tools, however, is that there needs to be a way for people to identify what language the video or audio is in, so that people can find the Cherokee or Fulani or Chakma recordings that are actually out there. And I want to point out that it's easy to say, oh, our users. I want to introduce a term that I think fits. We are working to make our users feel respected. Respected users, I think, is a way of thinking about it rather than just economic users. They need respect just like we all do. I think the big companies can do a lot to support the languages, but we can't do it without the communities. People have come to us and said, oh, we need Google Translate in our language. And that's as if there's some magic that Google knows about their language. It requires work with the communities.
That's again what I learned from Roy, that the community has to want it, has to be strong in it. And in your recap of the brief recap of the history of the Cherokee language and literacy, you were hinting at that too. It takes a village, right? And then it takes people in the middle who enable, who facilitate. And I think that's where organizations like Translation Commons comes in, right, Jeanette?
Yes, it's true. So Translation Commons always was very, very inclusive, all languages, that means, and all linguists. So in 2019, when UNESCO and the UN declared the year as the International Year of Indigenous Languages, we immediately got in touch with UNESCO because of the work we do, especially in language technology. And we became a social civil partner to the initiative. So as part of that, we started looking at how is it possible to digitize all these languages that have different scripts and are not enabled to be online or any digital system. So we got all the experts, including Craig Cornelius here on the call, and we authored a document called Zero to Digital. And what this document really does is it outlines the steps that a community needs to address in order to digitize. So of course, the first one is to have the script standardized and in a format that we can create fonts. Once the fonts are created, then you go to Unicode and you go through the standard of Unicode and you do the encoding, the script encoding, which is altogether one script, one big step really, script encoding. The next stage that Craig already has mentioned is the keyboards. If you don't have an input method, how are you going to type on your phone or on your computer? Right. So the input method is very, very important and a very big step of this. And of course, finally, we have data gathering. So we need to start with what is the CLDR, the Common Locale Data Repository in Unicode, which covers all those words that you automatically see on your phone or your operating systems, like what the date is, you know, the time, the days of the week, and you know, the month, and all of these things. So once we have this basic data gathering, this community is literally enabled digitally. And from that point onwards, it's a matter of the community getting in touch with the various, you know, institutions, organizations that will have either the browsers or the applications like Facebook, Google, and so on, which is what the Cherokee Nation did and many other communities like this. So all this we kind of captured in some very broad overview guidelines, Zero to Digital. And when the year ended, we were so involved already with UNESCO and multiple communities. For example, we're doing a pilot of the Zero to Digital document with the Sunuwar community. It's in Nepal, and they have been using the Latin script for their language, but now they want to get to their original script. And we're helping them go through all these steps. So we were so involved that immediately, you know, of course, with UNESCO, we're part of the decade. This International Decade of Indigenous Languages is from 2022 until 2032. So for the next year, until 2022 and the launch of the decade, UNESCO, with many partners, including ourselves, we are all working on creating the action plan for the decade. How are we going to implement this enormous task, not just of language technology to digitize the languages, but there are languages, for example, in Ghana, that there are millions of people who speak Akan, although English is the formal language, and they want to do machine translation between English and Akan, which is the two languages spoken in Ghana. Mm-hmm. So communities around the world are in different levels. And this is going to draw a lot of attention because of the technology involved, but also because it's a multi-stakeholder partnership or effort, initiative, if you want. One, you know, sector of, you know, of our industry or the international agencies themselves or the governments themselves, they can't just do it on their own. It has to take all of us. But what you've been saying, Cornelia, all along is the community. It is the community that is going to spearhead this. It's going to drive it. And they have to be the ones that are going to be making those decisions.
Right. So yeah, it's I'm just always reminded of the saying, it takes a village, right? So it takes the community to drive this, to want this. It takes the high-tech world to give these communities a leg up in the digitization. It takes activists, nonprofits like you, but where do the LSPs come in here? How can LSPs help? Maybe that's a question that Mila is best suited to answer.
Thank you. But before we do that, I wanted to add at a point that the communities actually want to have their language. The language Afrikaans, which was brought by the Dutch to South Africa, and is not the language of South Africa. And if you talk to the communities, many of them feel like their heart and soul has been taken away. And we can see the example of the Berry brothers that single-handedly basically put the Fulani language back on the map. So the communities are really, really wanting to do that. What can LSPs do and how can LSPs help? LSPs can actually act today by getting involved with Translation Commons and their initiatives, which are fantastic, which are giving the roadmap for the communities on how to digitize, how to create professional associations, how to create trainings, getting involved on the international level, the local level. And I think it's us standing together as a linguistic community and realizing that language rights are human rights and helping all of us be equal, truly equal. And, you know, I want to bring another example of what kind of an opportunity any community can have. And we have the example of Singapore. In 1960, Singapore had one of the lowest incomes per capita. But just because it happened to be on the economic crossroads, Singapore now is the most thriving community in the world. Mm-hmm. So any community through digitization and being online can become a Singapore. Doesn't matter how large or how small, and the communities want that. And I almost feel that as our social responsibility as language companies and language professionals to basically show the roadmap to the rest of the world.
I'm gonna undermine my own policy here that we want to take the questions from the audience at the end. But there's something coming in from Pedro Gomez right now that really fits very well with what you were just saying, Ludmila. So this is the exception that proves the rule for when we take the questions. So Pedro is asking, in a world where ROI rules, how do you manage to secure funds for these efforts other than pulling at heartstrings?
Well, and that's a great question, right? Because how do we give speakers of different languages the same customer experience? And that happens through technology. And the only way to do that is through technology. And at the same time, the technology of today enables us to take many shortcuts that were not available in the past. We're able to manage our linguistic resources better. There are ways of creating translation memories and machine translations. There are groups that are looking at how do you create machine translation where maybe you don't have that much content. And again, some of these, Craig Cornelius is very involved with that. Jeanette has many groups that are working on that within Translation Commons framework. But I believe that is through technology. And then we come back to ROI, because if you look at Singapore, it's a very small community. But at the same time, if you compare how many speakers are there for Norwegian language, and we justify and translate a lot of things into Norwegian, for Fulani language, there are 60 million speakers. For Mayan languages, there are 6 million speakers. So we're not talking necessarily about language access for communities of 10, but language access for communities of millions.
And
I'd like to add a little bit to this.
Yes, please. I was gonna
jumping
get
in.
Yeah. Please.
So something that not many people know, but all the big companies, organizations, especially the tech companies, they have task forces dealing with the next billion users. And it is a term which is used today a lot, because how are you going to grow when you already are a global company? You need to find the next billion users, and they are available. So when you look at the Broadband Commission that Milla mentioned at the beginning of this panel, where they want to bring connectivity to every single school, UNICEF, but also in the entire world. This connectivity is going to happen at some point, because without the connectivity, you can't have the users. Well, the next step is, once you have the connectivity, in what language will they be online? Exactly what Milla said at the beginning. And this is where we are just waiting. We're in the sidelines now waiting, because this is going to happen, because they want to have those billion users. They will have them connected. They will need to be in their own languages. So the return on investment is going to be part of their ultimate corporate goals and strategies of bringing those next billion users online.
Which is then again also in the interest of the LSPs to train linguists to see where language needs are emerging from these smaller communities, right?
Coming online as true economic partners. People are more likely to buy. I believe the number is 80% if the information is presented to them in their own language. Right. We all know the statistics and the numbers. People are more likely to buy, not be so price sensitive if the product is in their own language. But at the same time, they're bringing their products online. Today, online is allows trade between countries that didn't exist before. So those communities are bringing that return on investment by coming to the world and becoming true economic partners.
Right.
And that's a very good point. Sorry, I'm jumping in. This is becoming a discussion. It's a very good point to say that how can all these languages now become professionally involved in language translation when they don't even have the tools to do it. So right now we are volunteering translations for a huge organization that cropped out of nowhere last March because of the pandemic. They're called Open Source Medical Supplies. And what they do is they give instructions of how to create all this necessary protective gear for COVID-19 workers around the world. And we're translating in various languages for them, our volunteers. And yet we have a problem because a lot of the countries in Asia, Middle East, and so on and so forth, they don't have good internet connectivity, and in Africa. So these translators are not able to do the same work that all the other languages are doing. And not just that, but they're not supported by automation and productivity tools. We all know that SDL Trados probably covers as many languages as there are, right? But not all of the automation tools cover all these languages. So we have a long way to go to bring them to that economic opportunity that the rest of us have.
I have a slightly different point of view on all this.
I'm waiting to hear that. This is getting interesting. Good.
This may be anathema, but I don't think translation is the most important thing for these languages. I think the basic tools that can be provided is the most important thing, and then the technology gets out of the way rather than imposing barriers. For example, the Unicode standard lets people type in their own language, but do people need the user interface for every application in 6,000 languages? Probably not. But right now, with the current state of things, people can build their own fonts and install them on many devices, although not on all mobile. People can build their own keyboards using various tools provided by both big companies and also groups like Keyman, which let you build your own and distribute it to your people who are speaking the language. Connecting is what people need to do with their languages. And it's not just in the communities in isolated pockets in different places. There's a diaspora of almost every language community around the world. My friends in Africa want their keyboards to be able to use the Adlam writing system to not just to connect to their friends in Guinea, but they want to talk to the people in Brussels and in Seattle and Portland and all around the world. So those basic tools let people do what they want: the social media, the communications, the blogging, the posting. There are blocks that people put on. Some people build their applications so they can't let you type your type your name in the script of your choice. So you have to use Latin or some prescribed writing system. Why should that be? Another thing is that there are people urging tech companies to build more open platforms. Why can't we build spell checkers for different languages? Well, we can't build them for 6,000, but communities can build their own. And why can't they integrate them into the products that we have now? The Sami people of Norway are very frustrated that they can get great spell checking as long as they're typing in Norwegian or Swedish or Finnish. Yeah. But if they type Sami, every word is marked as being incorrectly spelled. That gets old really fast. We can change our platforms to get out of the way and let people use the technologies that are important for themselves.
And adding to Craig and also jumping in, we're seeing a trend where in the past everything was kind of going through English or maybe through Spanish, but we're seeing a trend today where it may be Albanian to Kyrgyz and not going through any one of the major languages. So that is also an emerging trend where the major languages are being skipped in the translation and communication.
Okay, I could talk with you guys forever about this, but I'm mindful of the time. So I have, before we go to questions that have been posted by the audience, I want to ask one final question to all of you guys. How can people in the room get involved? What can the everyday localization professional do to help? Jeanette,
yes, of course. Thanks for giving me the stage. Of course, Translation Commons is designed for language professionals to step in and volunteer, offer the expertise and knowledge exactly the same way that Cornelia, Craig, and Milla have done and keep on doing. And we have a lot of volunteers. Our language digitization initiative is underway in creating resources. I saw in the panel that Catherine Allen is in the audience, and Catherine Allen has offered some of the great work that she has done on interpreting training for Indigenous communities based for the US. well, these are all things that are going to be very valuable for us if we can adapt, for example, that so it can go out to the world. And then any other, guidelines or trainings that are free, that are available, or your expertise, bring it to us so we can adapt it for these indigenous communities that want themselves to be part of it. So please get involved. You probably, I hope you know me. You can reach out in LinkedIn. You can reach out through Translation Commons. There is always something that a community can benefit from your expertise.
Ludmila, Craig, any other ideas how people can get involved besides Translation Commons Digitization Initiative?
Well, Translation Commons doesn't just do a digitization initiative. I believe there's about 70, I call them how-tos, that are being built, from how to create a certification program, for how to train a linguist, for how to create a professional association. But if you choose to kind of do it on your own, if you are mindful of the different languages spoken in your area, and maybe you offer training and classes to the interpreters instead of, certification and testing today exists for a very limited number of languages.
Yeah.
For example, the Certification Commission for Healthcare Interpreters is doing a pilot at this time on how to provide certification for all of those other languages. So getting involved with other professional organizations as well, being the pilot side or the testing side, offering your own training is another way of doing that.
And Craig, I'm thinking Unicode, Unicode forum maybe, or what else is out there if I wanted to get involved and help?
Yes, being involved in the standardization process is useful, but also when people come to your company or come to an organization and say, can you support our languages, rather than say, no, we can't support it for some reason, don't slam the door. Say, oh, well, we may not be able to support your language fully in translation, but do you know that there are tools available on your mobile device that can probably let you type your language, or these are the tools that you can use to develop your own keyboards. Help people be aware of what's out there already, rather than saying, no, we can't support you, but encourage them to use what's available already. It's also very heartening that for some of the more advanced things, there are becoming do-it-yourself tools for speech understanding and text-to-speech, and even do-it-yourself machine translation tools are starting to come out of the universities and open source projects. So encourage people to use their language, even if you can't support it as a translation language in your product. But take a look at your translation systems and see, are there limitations that would keep you from doing a new right to left writing system? Are there limitations that would say, no, we can't deal with newer scripts that are being involved? Because there are 40 million people who speak the Fulfulde language and are starting to use the Adlam writing system. And that's a big potential customer base. If your system is not considering how that could be used, add in your technology. And who knows, maybe in 5 years, you'll want to do that.
Yeah, so even the localization technology providers do play a role here if they want to get ahead of this new consumer base that's out there. I have a couple of interesting questions from the audience at this point. Manuela is asking about new languages, those emerging in urban areas in Asia and Africa. One example is Sheng in Nairobi, she says. How do you suggest to stay on top of these truly emerging languages among languages of limited distribution so that users can access information and services in the language they're comfortable with? Those are not necessarily standardized or recognized with an ISO 639 code. So that's now not just an indigenous language that's not yet digital. This is about new indigenous languages.
So
Any takers for this question?
Yeah, I'll jump in, and I'm sure both Craig and Milla are going to follow up. first of all, who would need to stay in touch with these languages, and for what reason is the important thing? Because the way I see the interested party would be the community themselves. So I'm going to give you an example of the Maori community. They have a lot of terms, but the youngsters are creating all the time new terms on their cell phones, right? Well, the traditional Maori community now, instead of suppressing that and coming in and saying, no, these are not the standard terms, you need to use these, they take those terms and they incorporate them into their standard language. And that is an interested party about this emerging, you know, terminology that is happening. So I think that most probably there won't be many other interested parties for return on investment or for translation and so forth, other than perhaps for academic purposes. But it's the very similar thing that what Maori does. It is the academic section of the Maori community that keeps tab on these and adds them on.
But the point is that every language is emerging and every language is changing. In addition to that, English has changed even in the last 60 years. Every generation brings their language. And so again, for what we call common languages or the FIGS, there is a way we deal with that with new terminology, with the way the language probably changed completely from 100 years ago. And so if we take the same skills and apply that know-how to the languages that are emerging in Africa and Asia, and treat any language as a living organism where change is the only constant, then we give them a roadmap so they don't have to reinvent the wheel. We tell them this is how, what you can use.
There's a big challenge with emerging languages because, as everyone's pointed out, language isn't static at all. I give the example of the Cherokee language. It isn't phonetic anymore. It was phonetic 200 years ago, but things have changed since they invented their writing system. But Cherokee invented two terms which would be interesting to know. The first of all is 200 years ago, they invented a term for books, which they called talking leaves. And a few years ago, when they started getting involved with the technology, they invented a new term for Gmail, or email in general. It is called lightning paper in their language. So just using their language as a poetic means of evolving and changing the way they think about the world and giving them the tools that they can use for that is, I think, the most critical thing we can do. Of course, when a language does have some degree of wide usage, and there are people who say, let's standardize this, then there will be efforts made to add a language code and start doing things that are official. I'm working with people on Nigerian Pidgin, and there are at least 2 different ways of writing that. We get a lot of questions about Hinglish and Spanglish, how we support them. It's complicated. So I think we need to be flexible, build the tools, and do what people need and want rather than trying to force people into our predefined categories.
I like the idea of not making it all loan words, you know, that you borrow from English. So I love talking leaves and lightning paper. And next time I speak to Roy, I'm going to ask him, how do you say you're muted? Or you're on mute in Cherokee. Okay. So, all right. Okay. I hope that answers Manuela's questions a little bit. And now we have another question from my good friend Sören Eberhard. And Sören is concerned about quality assurance. He said, the Scots Wikipedia case shows how translations for small languages can go awry. What are your thoughts on quality control for Indigenous and minority languages?
Let me jump in on that, because we have been having to deal with that. You know, so how do you test our standard thing when there is no language, or it's a language of lesser use? We try to look for who published a dictionary, or who authored a dictionary, or who is teaching a class in that given language. But we can't doesn't exist. We actually engage peer review and multiple peer review and back translation through the peer review, and we get feedback from the peers. And when the language is evolving and when a new term is being created, we have seen that in English, but in my personal experience when working in Azerbaijan, I've seen that on a country level, when a new language came about in a very short period of time, then it would be a group of linguists who basically comes up with a new term and decide. There was interesting discussions. Do we borrow it from Russian? Do we borrow it from English, Turkish, Farsi? And then a term would emerge, and then some terms would stick and some terms wouldn't stick. So to come back to a short answer, it's extensive peer review, again, by the community that provides that quality assurance.
And just to add one small little point is that if you have a request for one of these languages that has limited professional linguists, and then you get another time, you know, the same request, chances are that you're going to get more. So this whole panel is discussing how we need to prepare for those situations. So the writing is on the wall that you need to start training and creating, you know, those potential professionals that you can rely on when the demand is going to grow.
Yeah, hence the title also, Languages of the Future. So we have another question. Someone is asking, Mariana is asking about the overlap in initiatives that might exist between Translation Commons and Translators Without Borders. Is anyone on the panel informed on what the, we can't speak for Translators Without Borders, but they're often on the forefront of disasters that often hit Indigenous communities. So do we know how they manage these things, and what have we as a localization community learned from that? And yeah, where's the delineation there?
So
Maybe
I'm probably the one more, you know, accustomed with this issue. When we started Translation Commons, everybody was mixing it up with Translators Without Borders. So the fact that we have the term translation translators is as about the only overlap we have. And it's probably the only reason there is confusion. So yes, we do know Translators Without Borders very well, and we meet regularly, and we share panels where we describe our, you know, projects. And I think that when people are able to hear about our projects and learn more about us and them, they see that there is actually no overlap. And since we are the youngest of you know, the two organizations, we made sure when we started that there wouldn't be an overlap, there wouldn't be a competition, because we're a very small industry. We do not want to have, you know, overlaps and competition amongst the nonprofits. We want to work together. And they have a special market for crisis and humanitarian work that they do. They work with the World Health Organization. They do a lot of medical. On the other hand, we have different programs. We have our language digitization initiative. We have another program, the Interpreter Commons, which is all about sharing information and knowledge. And we have our COVID-19, which deals a little bit close to what Translators Without Borders deals with as well, but not quite. And then in the big overarching concept of Translation Commons is we want to bridge the different elements of our industry. And we are first a community that deals for the community. So we address our pain points and we try to make things better for us. But we also try to advocate as a whole community, how can we bring more people in? So the language digitization initiative is exactly that, bringing new languages into our industry.
I see Sabina appearing, which means we're almost out of time. You're a beautiful alarm clock, Sabina. Thank you. But yeah, I think we do need to wrap up. For me, it's been a really a pleasure and a privilege to work with you guys and also with Roy on this panel. I have learned so much. And my hope is that our 60-something participants here this afternoon, and hopefully many more who will view this content later, that they get involved, that they get curious about Indigenous languages, and that they see beyond FIGSJ and realize our language heritage of the world is so colorful, and it is really what makes our world. So why would we, as the community of language professionals, not support those smaller languages? That is the future. It is a good thing to do, and it's the right thing to do. And I just want to leave you with our motto here: no language and no linguist left behind. That's our wish for the future. So thank you all very much for attending. And Jeanette, Ludmila, Craig, Roy in absentia, you're really, you're moving the world forward. So thank you so much.
Wonderful to be here.
Thank you, Cornelia, for moderating this beautifully. And thank you, Gala.
Wado.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye. Stay safe wherever you are. Stay safe.
Yes, thank you so much, Cornelia, Jeanette, Ludmila, and also Craig, for all the work that you are doing to raise awareness and to promote the digitalization of the Indigenous languages. This is truly inspiring and extremely impressive. So thank you very much. And thank you also, all of you, for joining us today.